The only supplements that I think are needed are generally electrolytes. And this has to do with ketosis and salt wasting, the natriuresis of fasting. People are on ketogenic diets, which many of your audience may be, or nose-to-tail carnivore diets. It's very important to consider the fact that we're going to waste salt. So I don't think many people would consider salt a supplement, but there's this company here in the States called Redmond Real Salt, which is an inland salt deposit that doesn't have microplastics and is less contaminated than sea salts. And I use that liberally. And what we know looking at sodium excretion in the urine and looking at levels of salt that we can use as humans, most humans on ketogenic or carnivore diets probably need at least 10 grams of sodium chloride per day, which ends up being about 5 grams of sodium per day or more. And so if people go keto or carnivore and they end up with lethargy or they end up with hormonal changes or their cortisol spikes, it's usually because they're not getting enough salt. So I think about electrolytes a lot in my clients. The other electrolytes I think of are potassium and magnesium. And they're all connected. If you don't get enough sodium, your body will waste potassium because of the potassium-sodium sort of countercurrent exchanger in the kidney. Your body will waste potassium in order to hold on to sodium. And so if we don't get enough sodium, we can become potassium deficient on a ketogenic or carnivore diet. Carnivore is a ketogenic way of eating. And then magnesium is an interesting one. People do find benefit to magnesium supplementation. My suspicion is that historically we would have had more magnesium from our drinking water. And if you look at magnesium in foods, even in plant foods, I would argue strongly that magnesium is basically impossible to get enough of. And we don't really know what enough magnesium is. And the RDA for magnesium is kind of a fuzzy target. But people might say, oh, almonds are a good source of magnesium or kale is a good source of magnesium. Well, guess what? You're not going to absorb any of that magnesium, and you can easily become magnesium deficient because of phytic acid. So the way that this gets back to the idea that plants and animals are from different operating systems. Plants don't use magnesium in the same way that animals do. So magnesium is going to be much more bioavailable, and magnesium is present in animal meat. Magnesium is going to be much more bioavailable when it's eaten from an animal because the animals are using that magnesium in the same way that humans do. Plants don't use magnesium in the same way as humans. They chelate it with a molecule called phytic acid. Well, the problem is that when somebody's trying to sell you almonds because they're high in magnesium or they're trying to extol the virtues of kale, they're not going to tell you the fact that, that magnesium is not really bioavailable to humans because it's in this phytic acid sort of chelated molecule, or it's in the chlorophyll molecule, which is another large molecule that kind of chelates magnesium in a plant. And so this is the problem with plant nutrients, is that people who are advocating for plants are not really telling you the whole story, which is that plant nutrients are not in the same form that humans use them, whether we're talking about niacin, whether we're talking about vitamin A, which is beta-carotene in plants, and retinol in humans, whether we're talking about folate, whether we're talking about omega-3s, alpha-linolenic acid versus EPA and DHA. Plant nutrients just don't get used that well by humans because it's from a different operating system. It's like Mac versus PC, and I would argue that humans are Macs and plants are Windows or PC because I'm partial to Mac.